guys this morning. Man, you guys had some great testimonies. Now, when I get excited, I start speaking fast, as you can already tell. So if you need me to slow down, just kind of wave at me. You might be in charge of that. And tell me to slow down, and I will. If you can't understand my accent, I can always make Ema come up and chase me around and translate, which I really enjoy. So you can also just let Ema know. So it's kind of funny this morning. Ema comes in, and he's like, why are you guys without lights? When he pulled up, he saw the light was on outside, okay? But today we were told what? We were told there was going to be no power, right? So we believed it. We didn't even try to see if there was power, did we? Like they said there's no power, there's no power. And we could have had power earlier if we would have just paid attention and saw the light. Huh? No, preach, huh?
Preach.
I think as Christians sometimes we miss the power that God wants us to have. Sometimes we're like, oh yes, I love Jesus. You know, we're just kind of a little mopey about it. And sometimes we sing songs like, oh, Jesus is good. And we don't really look like Jesus is good. We don't look like he has power in our lives, do we? But God has power. And he has power, he wants to connect with you. I don't care where you come from, what family, how much money you have, how much education you have, because God doesn't look at the same things, does he? He chooses the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. So we've been talking these last few weeks about dangerous faith. Dangerous faith. The first week Shannon introduced it and just talked about how God wants to do bigger things than we can even imagine, right? He wants to use just average, ordinary people to rock this world for his kingdom, but we have to stop believing it when people say, but you have no power, because we've been given power. He started talking the next week about baby faith, how we have to take little steps, right? Little steps. It starts with small things, right? When you start getting on the football field to learn, you don't just know how to dribble, you know, do the pullbacks and do all the moves. You have to practice, don't you? Sometimes when you start to dribble, you trip over the ball. It's easy to steal the ball from you because you don't know how to protect it. So you start with baby steps and then you learn more skills. And so God calls us to take a little step of faith here and there, and we learn to walk with him more. God doesn't call us to compare our faith in competition to others. Shannon is Shannon. He's going to preach different than me, right? But does that mean I shouldn't get up here? No, he's so good, I should just let him do it. No, God has something for us each to do, and it may look different. Someone's act of faith may be coming up here and sharing a testimony when they feel uncomfortable. Someone's act of faith may be going back to school when it's hard and they want to quit because it doesn't make sense. The plan was not according to schedule, but her act of faith is to say, no, I'm going to finish. I'm going to honor what I started. Our acts of faith are different. Some of your acts of faith are going to tell your granny about Jesus. Some of your acts of faith are being different in school, even though all the kids make fun of you. So Shannon introduced us to dangerous faith. We learned faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things unseen. That is Hebrews 11:1. There's some other versions. It says faith is the confidence that what we hope for will actually happen. It gives us assurance of things we cannot see. How many confident Christians do you see around you? Are you a confident Christian? Or are you someone who shrinks back? Because God is calling us to walk by faith. And it has us rise up in a confidence because we know that God can show up. We know it's not all about us, but it's all about him moving through us. So no matter what our weaknesses or our insecurities or our fears are, it doesn't matter because he's bigger. And just because the world says, no, you have no power, we look and see the light and say, yes, we do, and we switch it on. Okay? Okay. So this week, we're talking about, Shannon talked about baby faith. It's called maybe faith. But I'm going to call it possible faith. Possible faith. Perhaps God will move on our behalf, right? Shannon preached about Jonathan. You know, I read about this in this book I'm reading called Ladies with Swords. It's something like that. What is that book called? Girls with Swords. That's what it is. It's talking about women who rise up and actually fight. And so when Jonathan actually went up, he talked about to fight this army. This army came around, the Philistines, they were threatening Saul, King Saul and his army, and they were all just cowered back and they were hiding. And I was reading this book and it talked about when Jonathan went up on that mountain to say, perhaps God will work on our behalf. Perhaps he will give us the victory over these people. All he had was his armor bearer and one sword. You know why he only had one sword? His armor bearer doesn't even have any weapons. It's because the whole camp had lost their weapons already. They'd been plundered. And the only two people in that whole army that had weapons to fight this giant army was the king and Jonathan, his son. And Jonathan went up and said, perhaps God will move on our behalf. And remember what happened? God moved on their behalf. And he defeated the enemy because he said perhaps. He didn't look at the enemy and see how big it was. Instead, he looked at his God and saw how big he was. Right? Okay. So I want you guys to open to Ephesians 3, verse 16. You have a Bible? Ephesians 3, verse 16. And Shannon, you're responsible for being my timekeeper today. Okay?
Sure.
When you find it, just wave at me so I know. Got a couple. Ephesians 3. Okay. I'm going to get started. It says, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith. Through what? Faith. What? Faith. Faith. He wants to dwell in our hearts through faith. And it says, I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, may have power. Have what?
Power.
What? Power. Together with all the Lord's people to grasp how wide and long and high and deep is the love of Christ, and to know that this love that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled to the measure of all the fullness of God. Then you go down, verse 20 says, now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us. To him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Ish, how many of you guys have an imagination? Sometimes maybe you think crazy thoughts that, you probably shouldn't tell me, okay? God even has a bigger imagination. He's even saying, I want to do more than you can imagine. Those problems you see in society, and you say, I wish I could fix that. God is saying, here I am. I can. If you'll partner with me, if you'll stop looking up to your resources and what you have, and you'll start having faith, I'm going to give you power, and it's going to be something that surpasses your knowledge. Right? I don't want to worship a God I can understand. I don't want to worship a God that fits in this nice little box. That when I say dance, he dances. That's a small God, right? I want a God that can do more than I can ask or imagine, but we've got to activate our faith. So how do you know if you're moving in faith? Anybody? How do you know if what you're believing for is going to happen? Start acting like it's already happening. Yes, that's good. But are there guarantees? There aren't. How do I do something where there's no guarantees? You can't know if it's going to happen, but you know what? Nothing will ever happen if you don't move. The only way you can be sure of everything that's going to happen if you just sit still. That's the only way you're going to have certainty. I know if I just sit in this chair, then I can just sit. Right? But God is asking us to do things that are bigger than us, to have faith, which is substance of things hoped for and evidence of things unseen, so he can move. Faith is the gap between our abilities and the promises of God. It's the place of absolute trust and dependency on God. It's the gap between prayer and the answer. It's the place that's between sowing and reaping. It's where it requires faith. So, Noah. Who's heard of Noah? Has everyone heard of Noah? If you haven't heard of Noah, I'll take you back. Noah built a big boat, right? To save all the animals on earth and to save his family. Now, what some people don't know, he's out there building this giant boat. Had it rained on earth at this point? Do you know? No. It had never rained when Noah built this boat. Don't you think Noah looked crazy? Don't you think there's some days Noah's building this thing that God told him, and he's like, what is this thing I'm building? Right? People thought Noah was nuts. It had never rained. He didn't know what rain was, and all of a sudden I'm believing rain's going to fall from heaven. It's like Botswana, hey? One of you guys say, I've got to build this really warm home with lots of firewood. It's like in the middle of summer, okay? Because it's going to snow in Botswana. God told you, no, build this home, keep people safe, because it's going to snow, it's going to be a really bad winter, and it's in the middle of summer. What would people think? You're crazy, right? That's what it was for Noah. He's saying, I'm building this boat because God told me to, and they're like, what? Faith doesn't always make sense. Sometimes we have to run and we take a leap, and we're in midair saying, God, catch us, right? But the thing is, God loves us to take these leaps because he loves to catch us. Shannon loves to tell his kids to take risks. There was this preacher we had once that talked about his son was once on his roof. And his son saw his father down there that he trusted. And he said, Daddy, can I jump? And the dad was kind of like, can't really thought of that. It was a long way up. But his son trusts him enough, right? And so he said, sure, jump. And what happened? Did the father just go, oops? Smack. Did the son hit the floor? No, what happened? The father caught him. Because the father said, yes, jump, and I'll catch you. That's what faith is. It's knowing God and knowing his voice and seeing him and saying, can I jump? Are you with me on this? And jumping and seeing him catch you. Okay? It's not faith if you can figure it out. It's not faith if you can figure it out. God's ways are higher than our ways. Faith begins where understanding ends. God loves to do things that don't make sense. Why? Because then who gets the glory? Is it us? Is it we can say, look at what I've done. I'm prophet so-and-so, come to me? Is that why he does it? No. He does it so he can show the world aspects of him through average, ordinary people, and we can say that is nothing but God. Dangerous faith won't make sense, and it won't be measurable by our senses. What are our senses? Someone tell me a sense. We have 5 senses. What are they? Sight. Anybody else? Hearing, smell, taste, and touch. Faith is not going to be measurable through these things. You know why? Because we're going to see mountains in front of us, and we're like, how on earth can they move? Back when David was a boy, and King Saul was still there, and the Philistines were there, what happened is they used, the average men, the people in the army used their eyes. And they said, there is a giant in the land, right? We can't beat him. But then this young shepherd boy that knew how to see with eyes of faith, that was able to say, the same God that beat the bears, the same God that helped me defeat the lions with my bare hands, is the same God that can slay this Philistine. And you know what? The world needs a lot of Christians right now that can come up with dangerous faith. Because the enemy is trying to scare us. There are a lot of scary things in the world right now, right? Just getting back to Botswana. There's a heaviness from COVID. COVID has hit the world hard, hey? And people are scared, they're heavy, we've lost our joy, we've lost our power. Christians even sometimes are walking around like this, or we're picking fights with one another, and we're seeing this huge giant. Instead of focusing on God who can beat this giant, instead of letting him give us strength through the joy of the Lord, we're acting defeated. But the world needs us to rise up and to know that we have power and to have the joy of the Lord back, because we have the answer. We have the answer that whether COVID hits me and kills me or not, I still am a conqueror. I still am here right now on this earth to fulfill a purpose, and I don't have to walk around in fear, and neither do you. Because the worst thing that can happen is I can die, and then I'm with my King in heaven, and that is good. And if that doesn't happen, then I get to live here and fulfill my purpose and tell more people about him. It's time for Christians to stop being afraid. When we're afraid, you know what happens? When we start looking at the giants instead of looking at our God, at the camp, in David's camp, in Saul's camp, you know what happens? People arguing and bickering and fighting. No, you fight him, no, you fight him. Right? We start turning on each other. And that's what the world wants right now. But it's time to look at our big God and say, you know what? Yeah, I may not be much, just looking at me in the flesh through earthly eyes, but I am full of a big God that dwells in me by faith and gives me power. And he loves me immeasurably more than I can think, how deep, how far, how wide, how high, how long, whatever. He loves me so much I can't even measure it. And if I have the love of God in me, and he loves me, that's more than enough. That is powerful, guys. Do you know that you're loved by God? You, and you, and you, and you. I don't care what you did. I don't care how dumb you think you are. I don't care if you think you aren't good enough, or maybe you messed up last week. I don't care how weak you've been told you are. I don't care how stupid you've been told you are. Do you know I've been told all those things too? I had a lot of things spoken over me in my younger life that if I would have believed them and held on to them and said God's promises, I never would have rose up and became who God called me to be. Even in my adult life, I've had things spoken over me that I've had to learn how to reject. Remember, God loves me. And I'm more than a conqueror because of him, because he wants to work through me. And it doesn't do the world any good when I shrink back. The world needs us to rise up in faith. So I want you to do something. I want you to close your eyes. And I want you to think. I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about the world. I want you to think about your community. I want you to think about your resources. And I want you to think, what can I do? What is God calling me to do? What kind of dangerous faith? Now maybe when you close your eyes, all you're seeing is problems. Maybe you're seeing your family problems at home. Maybe you're saying, but we don't even have enough for this. How can I trust God for that? Maybe you're like, I'm just from a third world country called Botswana in the middle of Africa, and we have all these problems. Maybe you're thinking, COVID has destroyed things. Our economy is bad. We can't even pay for people to go to university anymore. What am I going to do? You may see problems, but God sees potential. When we see impossibilities, God sees opportunities. I want you to think about those things. Those things that came to your mind right now, I want you to hold those with you. And this week, I want you to think, God, what can we do about those things together? You can open your eyes. God operates on a whole other level. His perspective is different. Has anyone, I know the chances are small, but has anyone ever been on an airplane? So 3, 4, okay. So when you get up on an airplane, how small do the people look? Tiny, tiny. Now, have you ever had that person that you couldn't get out of your mind because they said something and it just rubbed you the wrong way? And you saw them as your enemy, right? Your thoughts are on them, you talked about them. When you see them in public, you're like, they seem so big, right? But when we get a kingdom perspective, God's perspective, it seems so much more insignificant, right? He takes the giants and he makes them look small. He takes the mountains and he makes them look like molehills. We don't even have to move them. It's like, what kind of mountain is that? I know the mountain maker, right? The other day I had to get a perspective. So we were building onto this house out on our farm on this property, and we live kind of near the border where we're up on the side of the mountain. And so I climbed onto the roof and I just looked out. And I needed a new perspective. And I could see Even the big semi-trucks, that take choppies and things like that. They're going down on the road, but it looks small. It still sounded a little bit loud, but it was small. The houses around, they got smaller. Those big thorn bushes, the thorns didn't seem so big. It was scary. Because I got a new perspective. So we've got to invite God's perspective into our life. 1 Corinthians 1, 26, 29. You can get there if you'd like. 1:26 through 29. Or if you take notes, you can write it down. It says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of this world and the despised things and the things that are not, to nullify the things that are, so that no one may boast before him. Does anyone know what that verse means? What's it saying? It's a lot of big words. God doesn't look at the stature or the outside, does he? He looks at the inside. He chooses the small shepherd boy to defeat the giant. He chooses you from humble beginnings. He chooses me, who was born to 15 and 16-year-old parents, who was an accident, who easily should have been aborted, and he chose me to go to the nations. Because I'm great? No. But because he's great, and I trusted that he was. How many of you are from a village? Anyone from a small village in here? That maybe, yes. Shannon is from a small village in America. Do you know that there were more cows than people in his town? Do you know that this guy in this very country town with 400 people, more cows than people, grew up loving hip-hop, and everybody else is a bunch of cowboys and rednecks? Okay? God selected him, and he has used him with hip-hop and unique things, and things that don't make sense. Chose this guy out of the middle of nowhere, little town, and sent him to the nations. Because he's awesome? No. I love him. I do think he's awesome. He's my husband. But because God's awesome. And because he was willing to choose by faith what God said and who God said he was called to be. Okay? So no matter your background, that's who God likes to choose. God's way of picking people, of proceeding, of processing, and preparing us doesn't make sense. And it can't be operated out of our senses. What Ngoni's going through, I studied for Chinese for how many years? Was it wasted? She can't go to China now. No. His ways don't always make sense, and we don't always see what he's doing in her life. And I talked to her the other day, it might not make sense until later. Shannon and I, when we got to marry, or when we were dating and courting and things, started talking to each other about how we'll spend some time in inner city America, we'll spend some time in Africa. We know we're called to be together, we're called to make disciples, we'll trust the Lord and see how it all works out. But then there came a part where all of a sudden our jobs in the inner city were gone. Okay? And we didn't end up going to Africa, we ended up going to North Carolina, to this little hillbilly town. Hillbilly, I don't know if you understand, but like a town with not a lot of, it was not a city. They operated very different, had a very different culture than we had ever been used to. And we spent 5 years there in group homes as house parents with adolescents. That wasn't part of the plan. It was inner city and it was Africa. But I can tell you that those 5 years we spent doing that work have prepared us and equipped us for youth ministry and for ministry in ways that working in the inner city or a church never would have. God's plans are different than ours, and he can use everything for his purposes. He calls us to do things that don't make sense, that are countercultural. Just like you guys, we like to believe that Satan is coming up with new lies, but he's not. His deceptions are the same all the time. If you go back and you look at the Bible, even back in the day, they were trying to, you've got situations with men and women and just all this drama, and the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah for all these different reasons, hey? There's no new sin, there's no new lie, because Satan can't create anything new. It's the same old lies he's doing. So growing up, also we're taught, you can't do relationships God's way. We're about to go in a series called Love, Marriage, Sex, and Dating, is that right? Friday nights, if you want to come out. But even being young in high school, I was in sports, athletics, all these things, and everyone's like, you can't do relationships God's way. I was the only one on my sports teams not drinking and not sleeping around and not doing the things. And I chose to take a stand and say, no, I'm going to be different. I'm going to trust that God's word is right. I'm going to save myself from marriage. I'm going to trust that he's going to bring a godly man at some point. But can I tell you, I couldn't use my eyes because all that were around me was idiots. There was no godly man on the horizon, right? And so I gave up this time and said, no, God, I'm just going to trust you and I'm going to focus on you. Shannon did the same thing. We hadn't met yet, but when we met, we were both at the same place, and on our very first time we went out on a date, we were able to say, listen, let's do this God's way. Let's do this, let's aim towards marriage. Let's not just casually date and play around. Our lives have a purpose, and we're going to honor God with our relationship. And that was countercultural. And there was several years that I was just waiting and not dating, and I was doing my own thing and being single that looked crazy. But I said I knew that God's promises were true, and that his ways were better. And you know what? Now I have a great marriage. It still takes faith. And I have a great marriage because I took that first step of faith to say, I will wait and trust that God's ways are better. Even though it seems impossible. Because the movies, Hollywood, the music, everything else was telling me a very different story, right? But I chose that what God says and his promises are true. So I'm going to act in faith right now like he's going to provide someday. I'm not going to compromise and settle. When we had a 1.5-year-old Alexis, we came over here to Botswana, hey? We sold everything, we moved by faith, we didn't know how it was going to work out, and it's still one of my favorite stories. We told Shannon's grandma. We went and visited her at her house. We had baby Alexis. She was maybe a year old at that point. And Shannon says to his grandma, Grandma, you know we're going to move to Africa. And you know what she said? She didn't say, oh, bless you, that's so good, go forth and make a difference. You know what she said? She said, yes, well, that's just stupid. Because to her, it didn't make sense. It was stupid. And it was. Via your senses, we could have stayed in America, had cushy jobs, had a nice life, still done ministry, but it would have been a lot safer. It would have been a lot more comfortable for us. We would have had family around to help us with our kids. But we knew God said go. And if we hadn't gone, this place wouldn't be here. Everything that God has called us to do wouldn't be here. But it started with that first act of faith. Okay? Even when it seemed stupid, we knew the voice of God, and he told us to go. This youth center you guys have heard. Shannon told you last time. We signed the lease for this, and Shannon looked up and said, okay, God, this is on you. And the realtor looked at him and said, what? Because she didn't know God ever signed checks, hey? We didn't know where the money was going to come from. All we knew was God said, do it. He said, build it, and they will come. And so we took a risk. We jumped. We're hanging in midair and saying, God's got to catch us. He's called us to do it. We're going to see. And if he doesn't, what's the worst thing that can happen? Okay? We've got to take risks if we want to see God move. We've got to operate outside of our senses, outside of our understanding, sometimes outside of our bank accounts, outside of our resources. God took the fish and the loaves of bread and he multiplied them, right? They didn't come with big barrels of fish and then he made it provide that way. No, he took what they had, faith, blessed it by God. And then a miracle happened. But we have to get ourselves in uncomfortable situations if we want miracles to happen. If we want to hold on and be in control our whole lives, that's a guarantee to never see a miracle. If you want to control everything, they're not going to happen. But we've got to take what we have, put it in God's hand and say, here it is, use it. It may not seem like much, but use it. Use my story, use my life. The land we're on now, it's a testimony, hey? The land we are on now, that is where we go for all of our camps. And we're building up campsites for when COVID's gone, we can do Camp Transform and victory camps and things like that. Do you know at one point, Shannon and I were kicked off of that land. We were renting it at one point from someone else. And he was out in the bush on a mission trip, and I had all my little kids, and I had baby Kendrick, and knock, knock, knock. The landlords had gotten mad because this property purchase from someone else hadn't gone through, and they kicked us off of the land. But now, as we've walked in faith and continue to build a faith trust with God, we continue to know that God is going to walk through. We keep walking by faith, keep trusting Him. You know what happens? The same house that we were once kicked off of, guess who now owns it? We now own the same house and the same property we were once kicked off of, because we kept walking by faith, kept trusting God to do big things, because we're using it for kingdom purposes. It's not we're using it for ourselves. We're using it for kingdom purposes. And when we use things for kingdom purposes, God even takes what the enemy took from us and gives it back and says, here you go. I'm going to use this for kingdom purposes, because you kept walking by faith when you could have quit. Most of us want to understand it all before moving by faith. We want to see the map, right? We want the 10-year plan. Hey, God, I'll follow you if you'll show me all the way it's going to happen. That's not how God works. Why? Because it doesn't require a relationship. A relationship is at the core of faith. It's hearing His voice. It's walking with Him step by step. Sometimes we're even terrified. But we know Him, and we know He's good, and that we can follow Him. My children will follow me everywhere. They'll trust me. Why? Because there's a relationship. They'll do crazy things with us. They'll jump off a wall into a swimming pool because they know Mom and Dad are here, it's safe. We've got to have that relationship with God. Faith doesn't begin with the answer, it begins with the question. When I showed you guys, I said, close your eyes, what do you see? What need did you see? What question? Maybe it's, man, I was just blocked in college from graduating. Right? So now the question is, what now? What do I do? And there's faith that Ngoni is going to have to activate that says, God in me is smart enough. I have the mind of Christ. I can persevere. I can overcome. That's going to let her finish that degree, even when it's hard. It may not be something she wants to do. It's not part of the plan, but she's going to be able to finish. Faith asks, when I was in 9th grade, I was at a camp, at a little bitty Baptist camp in Oklahoma, and God said, someday you're going to go to Africa. 9th grade. What if said something God told one of you guys? 9th grade says, some days you're going to go to Guatemala. You're like, I don't even know where Guatemala is. It's on the other side of the world. I don't know the language, this and that. But it takes what God says and says, what's now? And it treasures it in our heart. Now that was 9th grade, guys. You know, the first time I went over to Africa was when I was 17. God's timing is different than ours. She's got a degree in Chinese. She might not use that for 20 years because God's plans are different, but it's never wasted. What we have to ask ourselves when things come up in our life, what is God doing through this situation that He couldn't have accomplished any other way? There are times when sicknesses happen in our life. We have losses, and we say, God, but what are you doing? If you follow me on Facebook, when I was 16, I was diagnosed with 3 incurable diseases. 2 years later, God did an amazing thing. As a woman spoke something out, and I cried out in faith, and He removed those illnesses from me. I had 10 years of perfect health. But can I tell you that those 2 years of sickness drew me close to God in a way I would never have been drawn close to God otherwise? Because I learned to cling to Him and rely on Him, when all of a sudden this healthy 16-year-old body that was used to playing sports and being awesome, all of a sudden was failing and hurting. But it drew me close to God, and He used it for a purpose. When I was 27, all of a sudden I got sick after having Alexis, and I almost died. I had to have a massive surgery in the hospital. And you know what that caused me to do? I said, what now? And instead of saying, I got sick, I was robbed of my health, I'm just going to sit here and be sad. You know what we did? We said, you know what? I have no control over my life. No matter how much I plan, there's no way to control it all. But I can trust God. I've got one life to live, and I can do what He told me to do. And it was about 1.5 years later that we came over to Africa for the first time. Because I realized I can't control everything, but He is good. And it's worth taking steps of faith. So He used even those things. He can use even those hard things that happen in our life when we say, what now, God? Here I am. What are you trying to teach me? He can do things through those hard situations and change us and transform us better than He could through just giving us an easy path. If God is calling you to dangerous faith, you're going to have some growing pains, right? I always tell Kendrick, I tell all of my kids, 6 years old is my favorite age. I don't know why, they're just cute, they believe anything, they're funny, they laugh, they play, they dance, they're not embarrassed. And I always say, oh, can I just keep you being 6, right? But what would be really cute is when Kendrick's actually supposed to be 25, he's still running around acting like a 6-year-old. That's not cute, is it? I don't really want Kendrick to stay 6, because we've got to grow and mature. And there's growing pains sometimes that are required to have great faith, to have possible faith. If you have to have all the answers before exercising faith, you'll end up as a paralyzed believer. You guys hear that? Who wants to be paralyzed? What does that mean? Paralyzed means you can't move. Okay? And you see some people in life, and what they do is they're like, yeah, I trust in Jesus. Yes, I love him. He's the Lord of my life. And then they just sit. They come to church every week and they sit. And most of their lives, you wonder, some of them are like, after 17 years, I still don't know what I'm doing with my life. And you don't see fruit. It's paralyzed. Because we were never made to be like the Dead Sea. You know what the Dead Sea is? It's where water comes in, but it never goes out. So what happens? Everything in there dies. Because the salt, everything never leaves. We were never meant to be those Christians that just come in, and never move, and never flow out. We can't be like the Dead Sea. We can't have paralyzed faith. You want to grow in your faith? Go do something hard. Go do something that you can't do and only God can do. Go jump and say, Father, catch me. Here I am. Because if we only do what we can do, God's not going to move, right? Because he wants to do things bigger than us. God doesn't do man-sized things. God does God-sized things. Okay? All right. You can write this one down if you want. It says, faith is not wishful thinking. It requires action. Faith is not found in what you are believing for. Faith is found in who you are believing in. Did you guys get that? It comes back to the relationship. It talks about we have faith, and then that we dwell in Christ, that Ephesians 3:16, and then he gives us power, and we know how much love he has for us, right? It comes from a relationship. That's got to be the core. Because without a relationship first, faith is impossible. I can't have faith in someone I don't know. Hebrews 11:6. You can write it down in your notes. It says, without faith, it is impossible to please God. What is it? Without faith, it is what? Impossible. We need faith. It says, for the one who draws near to him must also believe he exists, and he rewards those who seek him. That means he's going to show up. Do dangerous things for God. He wants to show up, guys. Your faith will increase as you draw near to him. Now, sometimes we take these giant leaps of faith, right? Like maybe in Goni's situation, he said, I went and I got the degree. I'm breaking generational curses. But now there's a roadblock, right? There's kind of a wall. And she's like, well, why? These guys counseled me wrong. I've got 2 more classes. Sometimes we seem to think, oh, maybe I didn't hear God, or maybe God's not trustworthy, or maybe he messed up. But his timing is different than ours, guys. I've got a story that will top hers. You know how long it took me to finish my master's in counseling? 12 years. I started it right before Alexis was born. And then I got sick. I told you I was in the hospital, nearly died. Took a while to recover from that. Moved to Africa. Then the internet, things weren't so good. Then I brought in praise. I had a 2-year-old girl that had been abused and traumatized and had night terrors and couldn't even sleep at night. And I had to say, I'm going to finish my degree, or I'm going to lay it down and use everything I've learned to help heal this little girl. And it was put on pause. It took me, I didn't get to finish my degree until I got stuck in America this last time. And it wasn't the same way as I would have finished it before. It was a little bit different degree. But it took 12 years. But can I tell you, that 12-year time, what I learned that is going to equip me as a counselor was far more than I would ever learn from a textbook. That God used those 12 years to equip me for his purposes, even though it wasn't part of my plan. In March 2020, that was the end of our furlough, being in America. We were supposed to come back. You know, it was going to be the first time in 12 years that I haven't had a kid at home with me, juggling kids and ministry and all the things. And what happened? The world shut down. All of a sudden I got stuck in America. I was homeless, homeschooling 6 kids, so I didn't have all my kids in school like I thought, living with my in-laws, and saying, "What now, God? And when is the world going to open up for me to come back?" But God used that time in a way that I wouldn't have even known to ask for. It was more than I could ask or hope. He restored my degree. He brought healing to our families. There was some healing Shannon and I needed. He gave us friends and community and built us back up to where when we left Botswana, we were empty and tired, and God brought the joy of the Lord back into our life. I have this little bracelet here from a retreat I got on that says joyfulness, because God brought back joy, which is our strength. But that wasn't part of my plan. That was God's plan. But it didn't make sense. Didn't make sense for Ema. He's over here like, "Lord, I've got their kids, got their house, Kaho's stuck. I've got 6 months of doing this." But even for our team here, it wasn't part of the plan, was it? But can I tell you how much our team has raised up in our absence in a way that we could have never taught them to do? Because God's ways are higher than our ways. And I bet it was uncomfortable. And I bet you there were some growing pains, right, Casey? There were some challenges. But God can do things better than us. And at the end, we're going to be able to say, that's what you were doing. Okay? All right. So a closed door, a pause, that doesn't mean your faith isn't working. It means God's doing something better. So I'm going to give you 5 signs. Shannon, are you watching my time for me? Okay, I've got a little bit. I'm going to wrap this up quickly.
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So I'm going to give you 5 signs that you're living in faith, okay? First, I'm going to tell you a story. Genesis 12, chapter 1 through 4. I know most of you have New Testament, so you won't have it, so I'll just sum it up for you. Pretty much God told Abram, he said, "Leave your country, your relatives, your father's family, and go to the land I will show you. I'm going to make you a great nation. I will bless you, make you famous, and you will be a blessing to others. I will bless those who bless you and curse those who treat you with contempt. All the families on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram departed as the Lord instructed, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he left Haran. So God told Abraham, leave your country. The number 1 sign that you're living in faith is faith will be uncomfortable. Who wants to be uncomfortable? I got a few hands. I hope those were honest. Because sometimes I don't want to be uncomfortable. Sometimes I want to be in control. And I want to do what's safe. And I want to do what I can do. But that's not where God is. God's in the midst of uncomfortable. He said, leave your country. Can you imagine 75 years old? They used to live longer than us. But all of a sudden, saying to your family, your people, "Okay, I'm going. See you later." And they're like, "Where are you going?" "Oh, no." What if you said that to your parents? "God told me to go see you. Where are you going?" "Where are you going, Thelma?" "I don't know." Can you imagine? What would they think? They might think you're a little crazy, right? If you are comfortable, you are not in faith. Woo. No one wants to hear that, eh? God calls us to get out of our comfort. We will have never arrived. Do you guys know I don't like this part of the story because some of you guys are going to hear some things over the next couple of months that God has called Shannon and I, even in this ministry, to go to a whole other level. And you know what? It's going to be really uncomfortable. I would rather, you know what I could do right now? Here was our plan. When we came back in March 2020, our plan was like, okay, we've got our land out here, we finally got a stable house, we can build a campground, we can build a pool, we've got a good team at Urban Rhythm, we can just settle, right? Now we can live the good life. We can control this. We came to a level where I know how to manage this. We started this youth center out of nothing. You know, it took a lot of faith. We used to have to fight with the town council even to get this place open. Now the town council is coming to us and saying, how can we help you? They're sending people to us when there's needs in the community. But it didn't happen overnight. It was uncomfortable. And now we can just be like, let's just coast. But God's saying, I'm not in the comfortable. I'm calling y'all to expand the kingdom farther. I'm calling you to push farther. I'm calling you to take more territory because you know what? The world needs Jesus right now more than ever. It needs people that are powerful and have joy and have hope and aren't defeated by all this stuff that looks scary. We're able to look at the giants and say, but you're really small compared to my God. That's what the world needs. It's going to make us uncomfortable. I have a pastor that I grew up with, And we went to his retirement party when we were in the US. You know what he retired as? He left the pastorate, handed it off to someone else, and he went to be a military chaplain. Right now he's in Doha. And do you know what's going on there? All the refugees that came from Afghanistan, from this war that just happened and ended and all the crazy stuff, the Taliban kicked out half the country, all the things, they're all being taken to his site. And he is now a chaplain where all these refugees, all these hurt, scared, broken people are. Because he didn't just settle. He didn't say, oh, I'm done. But as Christians, we never get to fully retire, okay? We're going to go out with our boots on. That's what he's doing. He's going out strong. He's saying, I'm still going to be used by God. There's no settling. Faith will be unfamiliar. That's number 2. God said, leave your people. Now, some of you, that doesn't mean you're going to leave Botswana. That doesn't mean all of us have to get up and go missionaries, okay? But it does mean we have to leave the generational curses in our past. It does mean we have to leave the traditional doctors or whatever practices our family has. It means that we might be the first ministers in our family. Shannon and I are that. We see a lot of missionaries and pastors, and they're like, I'm a 4th generation pastor, or my parents were pastors. We don't have that. We're starting a new line. Even our family, we both come from divorces. We're not going to have that in our family. We're leaving the familiar, and we're starting something new. You can do that. Start a new line. We can't look at people. Maybe we have families that are racist, or maybe we have families that are small-minded or hung up on different things. We say, we operate how God operates, right? We break down man-made walls, and we see with new eyes. We operate how he does. Our worldview changes. Number 3, faith will require new provision. The Lord said, leave your father's household. He left everything that was familiar. He left the land. He left his parents. Abram left everything that was familiar, and he had to leave his father's household and trust God for provision, didn't he? It says most of us have seen God move before, and we want him to move exactly like that again. What if Shannon and I said, let's just go start signing leases everywhere and say, okay, God, you provide, and giggle and watch the realtor freak out? That's not what we're supposed to do, because God moves in new ways, doesn't he? We can't get God into a formula. So he's going to call us to go somewhere where we don't know how he's going to provide, and we're just going to have to take a leap of faith and say, here I am, God. I hear your voice, and I'm going to do it. It's just like in the Bible. Sometimes God healed people by spitting on mud and putting it on their eyes and he healed them. And sometimes he said, go bathe in this. Sometimes he went and touched them. He's not a formula, right? You can't see, okay, so Shannon did this exact same thing to make his youth center happen, so I'm going to do the exact same thing in this other vision completely different. Because God wants it to be done through relationship, right? Number 4, faith will force vulnerability. How many of us like to be vulnerable? Vulnerability, what does that mean? You know. Yeah.
It's like being open.
Being open, okay. Anybody else? Sasha? Showing your weaknesses? Yeah. Being honest about them? Yeah. I don't like being vulnerable. Okay, just being honest. It's safe if I keep people like this, because then they can't hurt me. They can't let me down. But God says, be vulnerable. Show your weaknesses and put your trust in me for me to show up. As a missionary, in my culture in America, can I tell you how humbling it is to be a missionary, going to people saying, please partner with us? There's a principle, there's a saying in America that calls, you pull up your bootstraps and you do the hard work. We're supposed to be independent as Americans. We make our own way. And here I am saying, as an adult with 6 kids, I'm trusting God for people to partner with us in this work. I'm having to go and I'm having to humble myself and ask people, do you think my flesh wants to do that? My flesh wants to say, I'm smart, I'm educated, I have a master's degree, I've got this. Right? That's not how God works. We have to be vulnerable and humble and say, here I am, God, show up. We're going to take stupid acts of faith, we're going to jump, we're going to trust you. No matter what. This place keeps growing. I've got to trust God to provide another van, because one of our vans is having problems, right? And it's going to take vulnerability and humility to say, God, we need you to show up, because you know what? How many people? We almost have 50 in here. We have like even more young people. We saw all of them today. And it's going to take vulnerability to say, I can't figure this out, God, but we need you because you're at work, right? So it takes vulnerability. Faith isn't always safe. You guys said it earlier. It's going to expose our insecurities, our fear and dependency on other things. We have to operate from an otherworldly perspective and a countercultural perspective, all of us. Because none of our cultures are fully kingdom. So we have to learn to see through other eyes. There are some aspects of our culture that are kingdom, but there's a lot that aren't. So we have to say, God, change my view and help me see how you see. Because our human eyes will fail to see the right way. There's a myth that says the safest place to be is in the will of God. Have you ever heard that? We talked about the Chronicles of Narnia, and they asked about Aslan, and they said, is he safe? And they said, no, but he is good. It's not the safest place because it's scary, and we're trusting God to show up. And really, we're in a battle, guys. Battles aren't safe. If you want to be safe, go sit on your couch and eat potato chips and watch TV. That's the only safe place, but we're in a battle for our lives to change, for other people's lives to change, for our nation to change. It is very important who you talk to when you're in a season of faith. Up here with Ngoni, I prayed for her to be surrounded with people who will push her in faith. Because there's a lot of people that have small faith, right? They just say, this is all God can do for me, and they're struggling, and their family's struggling, and they can't even take care of them. And we're like, don't surround yourself with people with small faith. If you want to be prosperous someday, surround yourself with people that know how to handle money. You want to have a good ministry someday, surround yourself with people that have shown that God has entrusted them with the ministry, that have fought for it. You want to have a good marriage someday? Find someone with a good marriage. Get wise counsel. And get someone who will believe with you and believe in you and push you, even if it makes you uncomfortable. Because you know what? The good ones that push you are going to cause you to have growing pains, and you're not going to always like it. But faith requires us to grow. Number 5, faith. This is the last one, last point for faith. Faith requires us to make a move. It's not just wishful thinking and dreaming. God told Abraham, when you move from your country's relatives and father's house, then I will show you. If he just said, okay, God, I'm going to sit here until you show me, would anything happen? No. He said, you've got to move. Emmanuel will tell you, there's times we've had this youth center going on. We're going strong, but then we take a break. And all of a sudden, we start the programs back up, and it's like half the number. Because it takes momentum, right? To keep things moving, to keep things growing. But when you stop and you just sit, it takes a while to get started back up again. So start taking that first step. What's that small step that God's taking you to, calling you to make? If you want to be faithful with a lot, you first have to be faithful with a little. A lot of us are like, I hope I have a big ministry someday. But we're not even faithful with that small thing He's given us. We're not even willing to share our faith with that neighbor that maybe we don't like. God's already given some tools in our hands. We're like, God, we're trusting you for more, but we're not being faithful with these that He's already given us. It takes work. Faith takes work. It takes movement. We've got to get out of our seat, out of our comfortability, out of what's familiar, and move. Faith will move you towards increase. That means that if you start walking by faith, you see, Shannon and I have been walking by faith for a long time, right? And so what can you see? If you've been part of our lives, you can see we just came to Botswana with 1 kid. One way we have increases, now we have 6 kids. Don't know if I recommend that, that's a little crazy. But God will give you increase. So we started with nothing. We started with meeting people under trees. And now there's a youth center. Now there's camps. Eventually there's going to be more youth centers. God's given us a big dream. But you have to start moving. And the purpose, God wants to give you increase. He wants to make your name great. He wants to increase your influence, just like He did with Abraham. But the whole purpose of it is for His glory. Not for you. Not so you can say, look at me. Look what I have. I'm prophet so-and-so. It's never to draw people towards us in our name. It's always to draw people towards His name. And when we do that, we point more people towards Him by what He gives us. He can entrust us with more. So my challenge to you, Shannon's telling me my time's starting to wind up here, is what move do you need to make this week? What step is God calling you to take a step of faith in? And those lies that are going to start coming to you, you say, but I'm this, I'm that, I'm not good enough. Put those aside, okay? And start one step at a time. Because you're not going to get up the mountain by just looking at it and being afraid of it. You're also not going to get there by just standing still, are you? So we one faith here. You can look around and yeah, it might be scary, not going to come home. Another step, and then you're going to get to the top of this mountain you didn't know you could conquer, and you're going to have a totally different God-sized view. And you're going to see from a new perspective. And you're going to have a new level of faith that doesn't let you settle and sit there, but then takes you somewhere else farther on and takes you to a bigger mountain in the future. So I want you guys to ask yourself, what step of faith am I going to make? What move must I make today? I'm going to leave you with that thought. And don't think the thoughts of, I'm not enough, or I can't do it. Okay? Because it's God that we're focused on, and He's more than enough. He can do immeasurably more than we could ever dare to ask or hope. Shannon?
Okay, so can you put some music on for us quickly?
Everyone's give her a hand, hey?